Hello and welcome back to Thoughts per episode House of the Dragon edition. Today we are talking about Season 2, Episode 6, Small Folk, where we are finally shining a lens on the small folk of the world, or more specifically of King's Landing, and the fact that they, of course, have a part to play in the Game of Thrones. I feel like I just read that off a script, but I did not. Yeah, I would say there are two main things happening in this episode. The first thing is the uprising of the small folk as they become more and more desperate for food under the uncaring, one-eyed gaze, I guess, of Aemond, who is now Prince Regent. They don't care about war or politics. You know, they have starving children to feed, and I think it's crazy. Not crazy, because it's happened throughout history, but I think it's, sadly, precedented that the ruling class would overlook that fundamental fact. It speaks to a nature of, like, you know, the small folk, yeah, they're those people who are in the streets. You know, they couldn't possess the same depth of love and care that we have for our families, us nobles, and therefore they are, of course, taken aback. They are surprised when they inevitably rise up, because the working class, of course, are just there to adore the ruling class, right? They're just there to put them on the throne and to be ruled by them. Anyway, Mysaria and Rhaenyra cook up this brilliant plan to not just stir unrest within the residents of King's Landing, but to then incite what happens with, sending them food, showing even though it's like still a manipulation of the masses, they're showing like, oh, Rhaenyra, she still cares about you. She's going to send you food under cover of darkness. You know, King's Landing, the rulers of King's Landing, the usurpers, would never want you to have this food. They only want this food for themselves. Like, I think about the scene with, what was it, Ulf, or whatever his name was, and the lady of the pleasure house. I don't know if we've ever been told her name. If we have, I've sadly missed it, but they're having that conversation in the inn or the tavern or wherever they are, where they're having breakfast, and it feels very staged. I don't know if it's meant to. I think it is. It feels very scripted and staged, like they've clearly cooked it up, and they're like, okay, we're going to wait till it's fairly busy, and then we're going to have this loud conversation, and we're going to stir up this unrest for Rhaenyra, because they, of course, would be privy to the plan, because as we saw in a previous episode, that handmaiden or that maid or whatever they call them in this world arrived, and we saw her talking to the girl at the inn. So clearly, you know, we're showing that this is all manufactured, aren't we? And then the second main thing that they're doing in this episode is trying to find a new dragon rider, and of course they try Lord Darklyn. I believe his name is, with Sea Smoke, and Sea Smoke absolutely trolls this fellow. At least that's one read on it, right? He absolutely trolls this fellow by lowering his neck and showing his saddle, and it looks like he's inviting Darklyn to climb on. And then just as Lord Darklyn finally feels like he's able to, he says, I've done it, and he goes to climb on, and Sea Smoke turns around and cooks him alive. Sea Smoke, that was extremely rude. I must admit, sadly, this scene was slightly spoiled for me because I clicked onto YouTube kind of by default this morning before I went over to Now TV, and the first video that showed up to me was the behind the episode thing, which they called Making Dragonfire, and it was a thumbnail that showed Sea Smoke. And while I'm not great at telling dragons apart, I did then think, oh, clearly we're going to have a dragon set fire to someone in this episode. So when they were like, oh, let's get Lord Darklyn to try and tame Sea Smoke, I was like, that man's fucking dead. And to be fair, it doesn't take a lot of brain cells to to go, oh, that man's probably not going to be able to ride Sea Smoke. But it does mean the little fake out they didn't really work on me. Now, I did say that Sea Smoke was being a bit of a troll. That was a bit of a joke. I actually think there's a little bit more to it than that. When Lord Darklyn was speaking to Sea Smoke in Valyrian, I do think Sea Smoke was like, maybe, like, sniffing, like, there's just enough Dragon Rider blood in this man. Maybe I can let him ride me. But it's my personal opinion, it's my personal theory, that the second he spoke in Common again, I think it's called the Common Tongue, right? The second he spoke in the Common Tongue was like, I've done it. Then that was like, oh, no, this man's too common for me. Like, he's not a Valyrian Dragon Rider. Like, I know, was it Aegon talks to his dragon in common tongue. So maybe that's a hole in my theory, but I think when it comes to literally like trying to tame a dragon and not having quite enough royal blood to tame a dragon, I think that might have been what sealed the deal. And Seasmoke was like, you know what? No, I deserve better, and that's why Seasmoke then went and found Alan's brother, I forget his name, but like clearly Alan and his brother are the bastard sons of Corlys Velaryon, and therefore they will have a lot more Valyrian dragon rider blood in their veins. And so I like that, like clearly we saw Seasmoke circling before around, I'm gonna have to go look up his name, Adam of Hull. Yeah, earlier we saw Seasmoke circling Adam of Hull, and I get the idea that Seasmoke's like, okay, here's one. Here's another one I can be ridden by. And now, after this attempt to get Seasmoke to have a new rider, Seasmoke was then like, I will go and seek out my own rider who is of more Valyrian blood, because us dragons are just like that. It's pretty cool that we're getting to see exactly how taming dragons works, because that stuff has only ever really been alluded to as far as I'm aware in the books, as to like what is required to be able to tame a dragon. There's that character in the books who isn't in the show, in the Song of Ice and Fire series, who tries to tame a dragon and doesn't get very far with it because he does not have royal blood, but I think that's about as far as we've touched on that. And of course, is it about royal blood, or is it about Targaryen blood? Is it about the notion of royalty and Targaryen exceptionalism, or is it about whatever dark magics the Valyrians used to tame dragons back in the day? I'm going with the second option. In this episode, we also see the continuing rise of not Aegon, he's in a bed. He's not rising anytime soon. That man is in a sorry state. We see the rise of Prince Regent Aemond. I mean, we saw the rise from last episode, but we see the continual rise of him, and how he starts sending people away, and how people are intimidated into silence and intimidated into agreeing with him and doing things that they don't want to do, and how he sends his mother away and strips her of her authority and her power. And I do love that scene at the end of a small council meeting where she kind of tenderly touches his face and says, has the humiliation of your childhood not been revenged upon enough yet, or whatever she said. She said it better than I did. And she kind of almost weaponizes her motherhood to try and like appeal to like the quote unquote real Aemond. Because in the books with Jon Snow, you have this whole thing about killing the boy and letting the man like rule, and like love is the death of duty and stuff. And I get the impression that Aemond is kind of a darker version of that. Like we've seen Aemond's vulnerability quite recently, and how he cast that aside when Aegon made fun of him and stuff. And so she tried to appeal to that version of Aemond, and yeah, it didn't work out. Honestly, I'm kind of getting some red flags for Alicent here. I don't remember how the story actually goes, having read it years ago, but I'm getting some red flags just in the way that they've suddenly had her, like, almost desperately seeking out Aegon, seeking out Kristen, and then obviously kind of being waylaid by her brother and talking to her brother and asking about Daeron. It almost sounds like she's planning to do something drastic, since she doesn't have any power anymore. I hope that's not the case. We also see Larys failing to manipulate Aemond as he has manipulated Aegon, but I think more crucially we see Aemond treat Larys with cruelty and calls him a toad, and we see how that affects Larys. And then later when Larys is talking to Aegon about the idea of being broken and about how people are going to perceive you and pity you or just avoid looking at you, we do see a tear roll down his cheek. So while Larys is a very manipulative person, I tried to say the word manipulative there and I lost half of the letters, and while he could be using his emotions to manipulate Aegon, I also think that this is part of the real Larys showing forth here. But also, yeah, I do think he's going back to Aegon and being like, okay, let's work on you. Like, I know you're like burnt toast right now and you're broken and you're not really going to get much better, but you are still the rightful king and you do listen to me and your shithead brother does not, so let's see what we can do with you. We also see Daemon's continued descent into madness in the haunted house, and what I find quite funny is that he starts accusing Lord Strong of poisoning him, and he starts growing suspicious about all of these men of a political standing poisoning him and therefore forcing these visions upon him. And I find that so fucking funny because this guy just willingly took this weird potion from Alice Rivers and then immediately started hallucinating, and he apparently cannot put two and two together. Oh dear. I do also love that we got to see more Paddy Considine as King Viserys in Daemon's dreams. I was really hoping we were going to get some more Paddy Considine, and we did. So I'm very pleased with that. And I thought it was really interesting how we saw Daemon. He witnessed his brother crying over the death of his wife, and he actually comforted him this time. And he said, I wasn't here for you last time, but I am now. And so clearly Daemon is still working through some stuff and trying to explore different possibilities for, consequences of the things that he did not do in the past. The last thing I want to mention in this episode is the romance between Rhaenyra and Mysaria, which I was very excited about because I felt like I was getting those vibes for the last few episodes, and I kept questioning myself, like, is this just me reading into two characters who, this isn't going to happen with? Like, is this just queer baiting, etc.? But I love it. I love that these two kind of ex-lovers of Daemon Targaryen are kind of coming together in their shared kind of trauma of this man. I love that through their, discussing of him, they've found more of an ideal partnership with one another. And this is the kind of thing that does happen in the real world sometimes. I know of stories of, two ex-girlfriends of the same guy who end up talking about him and realize that they'd be better off together with each other. So it's cool to see it happen in a story. Of course, it's also dangerous because this is Rhaenyra cheating on Daemon Targaryen. They're not officially separated. They haven't had a divorce or anything like that. And if Daemon was to learn of this, who knows how he would react. But I've got to say, Rhaenyra this season has quickly been becoming my favourite character in the show. Emma Darcy does a brilliant job acting as them, and it's just... you could not endear me to a character more in this show than Rhaenyra. She obviously has flaws, but I love how Rhaenyra talks about, wanting to be more of a warrior, the difficulties of ruling as a female ruler, and how people in that world have never had one and do not see females as being capable to rule and that kind of thing. And I love where her character is going here. It was just so romantic, that scene. Gosh dang. Anyway, you don't expect to see something like that in Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon all the time, because a lot of it focuses on really horrible relationships. So, when something nicer, as nice as a queen consorting with her Mistress of Whispers can be, I suppose. I don't think Mysaria officially holds that title, but that's basically what she is. It will inevitably turn horrible at some point, but for now I'm enjoying it. Anyway, thank you for watching this episode of Thoughts on House of the Dragon. Let me know what you thought down below if you like the video if you liked it. If you like, that's a lot of word like. I've said like far too many times, and I'm now going to stop talking. I'll see you next time.